How fear stalked the science of blood transfusion. For those of you who know what a blood bag looks like, we've all been through a lot over the past few years. So although I'm talking a lot about blood transfusions, blood donation, I'm going to do my best to keep this from depressing the hell out of us. We'll start with some good news. The good news is that in the year of our Lord 2022, we have used science, thank you, to overcome most of our fear of blood transfusions. Progress! Woo. Yeah, wonderful. Okay, but so where we end up with significant progress. You can't have blood transfusions without blood donations. We've had safe blood donations for most of the 20th century. That's great. Unfortunately, now we're sort of in a crisis with donations here in the US and even globally dropping off. It's actually the worst period of blood donations in a decade. And it's gotten so bad that health agencies around the world are actually reconsidering their homophobic take on who gets to donate blood. So the FDA announced this January that they would be reviewing the restrictions on people who have sex with gay or bisexual men, despite screening procedures eliminating nearly all of the HIV from donated blood. People who have sex with gay or bisexual men have been banned in the US from donating blood for 3 months following their most recent sexual contact. That's a good thing, but we're getting to that. Let's jump back 25 centuries. So, 25 centuries ago, we hadn't really figured out what our major or even our minor organs could do or did. And how blood moved throughout the body? No clue. No idea. So you're going to encounter a lot of people in this little tale who are famous for other things. And as I said, I've kind of tried to minimize the gore and the viscera. Not my fault they're dead. They also didn't donate blood, as far as we know. The earliest recorded studies of the human heart and circulatory anatomy can be found in 500 BCE, before chicken eggs, by Alcmaeon of Croton. That's the guy on your left. 150 years later, Aristotle describes the heart as having 3 chambers. So close. If there were cigars back then, he wouldn't have one. So, by the end of the 2nd century AD, the Greek physician Galen's theory of a venous and arterial circulatory system had actually become widespread. Right? Great. He was on the right track, but he thought that the circulatory system originated with the liver. Obviously, alcohol does that. Closest I could come to a red drink I could tolerate was a Negroni. So, first person to have accurately described the human circulatory system is not who you think. It was actually the Arabic scholar, mathematician, and physician Ala ad-Din Abu al-Hasan Ali ibn al-Hazam al-Karsh. Ibn al-Nafis, as he was known to his friends and patients and those who were dedicated to the conservation of syllables. At the tender age of 29, Ibn al-Nafis wrote basically a lengthy medical diss track that contested the Persian physician Avicenna's Canon of Medicine. Published in 1242, it became one of the few medieval works of medicine that was accurate and improved on our understanding of the human body. You wouldn't think this would be so damn hard. Science is hard. So, never mind the 1,000+ years between the peak Roman Empire of Galen and medieval medicine. Spectators back in the Roman Empire would drink the blood of gladiators, dying gladiators, not the ones who were winning, hoping that their strength would transfer to them, and that misunderstanding of how blood actually works played into the first recorded blood transfusion, which occurred in this year that just it keeps popping up in our stories here at Salon, 1492. Ships. anti-Semitism, fucking idiots. So, I'm going to diverge here. I'm going to tell a joke. As some of you who know me, I like jokes. So, did you hear the one about the Pope and the 3 underage boys? No. So it turns out that Pope Innocent VIII, who was the Pope in 1492, was actually very ill. He was severely ill, and he was unconscious. His physician paid 3 10-year-old boys a gold ducat each, to bleed them and feed the blood to the comatose pontiff. Soon thereafter, everybody died. I didn't say it was a successful blood transfusion. So, as we've been discussing, sub-Scandinavian Europeans have long lived with the idea that human blood can be used to revivify others. They're not wrong, they just didn't really have the right way of doing it. 1628, English physician William Harvey followed in Ibn al-Nafis's footsteps, also accurately described the human circulatory system, and Europeans finally began to change how they viewed how blood works. Just quick aside for the record, although it sounds like Harvey was biting off of Ibn al-Nafis's work, it's just not clear that he had actually encountered it because Arabic scholarly texts were not widespread in Europe at the time, arguably even today. 30 years later, Christopher Wren invented a syringe that could inject fluids intravenously, which he tested on several different species of animals. He attached a quill to a small bladder. The quill was from a goose. The goose, we presume, was alive. And the quill was detached. So he attached the quill to a small bladder, filled the bladder with wine, also sometimes with beer, slid the tip ever so gently, I'm sure, into the vein of a dog, and voila, the dog got drunk. The experiment was declared a success. So, the stage was set for successful blood transfusions, right? Medical enlightenment spreading across the land. Fuck no. Well, to be fair, they got 1 out of 2. 1 out of 2 ain't bad. So Wren inspired Richard Lower, an aspiring doctor, to attempt a blood transfusion. How many of you are aspiring doctors who've attempted blood transfusions? I mean, I know it's 4.5 centuries later, but fuck. So this guy, Richard Lower, attempted a blood transfusion between dogs in 1665. He basically thought, oh, Wren, hold my beer, or hold your beer. If we can inject alcohol, why can't we inject blood? They're basically the same, especially if you drink a lot. So he drained nearly all the blood from a smaller dog, tied an artery in the smaller dog to a larger dog, transfused the blood from the larger dog to the smaller dog, I think with putting one dog on a higher level and praying gravity would work. I mean, siphons had been invented by then, but fuck. So, transfused the blood from the larger dog to the smaller dog, and the smaller dog lived. History doesn't actually talk about the bigger dog. I don't know. I prefer bigger dogs. Sorry. Anyway, now we're getting to the meat of it. On June 15th, we have an actual date. June 15th, 1667, King Louis XIV's personal physician, Dr. Jean-Baptiste Denis, in France, would manage the first human patient blood transfusion, eager to make a name for himself and beat that schmuck Lower and his pal Edmund King in England to doing a human blood transfusion. Denis transfused sheep's blood into a 15-year-old boy. I don't know what you were doing at 15. That was a bit much. Even worse, they had used leeches to bleed this poor kid more than 20 times. So no wonder he needed a blood transfusion. He was deficient. The boy lived, perhaps, because he finally had some blood in him. What doesn't? Dr. Denise's second transfusion was also a roaring success, if you consider success that the patient didn't die. Turns out historians now believe that both patients survived because the sheep's blood amounts that were transfused into their bodies were actually relatively small. In his third attempt, Dr. Denise, he transfused lamb's blood into a man suffering from psychosis. And I know this has happened to all of us, really. You know, you think, well, the lamb is very meek and mild, and so this patient who is really losing his shit needs lamb's blood in order to calm down. So the man's urine turned black as soot, according to Denise, and he also suffered from chills and a fever, and then he expired. Right? So the patient Denise experimented on for his fourth attempt also died in the middle of the transfusion. Unfortunately, this patient had a wife who was rather pissed off by the murder of her husband, and so she got him taken to court. We're back to the dogs, but only because there's really no other suitable image for this. In this particular courtroom in France, the needle did not fit, so they had to acquit. Hey, you don't hear that reference often here, and you certainly don't hear Michael Jackson often here, so you're lucky tonight. You're very lucky. The court banned blood transfusions, and by 1670, the Catholic Church, the French Parliament, and the Royal Society in England had all decided, screw this, we're banning blood transfusions in humans. The dogs are pretty happy. So, all that being said, according to the medical historian Holly Tucker in her book Blood Work, which is really good, I highly recommend it, it wasn't only the increasing number of corpses from failed blood transfusions that were scaring people. There was a legitimate concern then that interspecies blood transfusions would lead to monstrous animal-human hybrids, never mind all the corpses. So, for those of you that pay attention to this stuff, sadly, things have not changed. How many of you remember the fear that was running rampant among certain states and social circles about using stem cells and gene therapies in clinical settings? Fears kept doctors from doing, unfortunately, the kinds of experiments that we need in order to develop better and more helpful medical science. Thank you. So, blood transfusions were pretty much verboten until the 19th century, and then this guy came along. James Bloodnell. He was an English obstetrician, surgeon. He saw a lot of women die from blood loss in the third trimester and during childbirth. And although you may be surprised to hear it, he was apparently quite arrogant. I know, another shock. This is just laying it thick on you. So he didn't care that there were outright bans on his proposal, which was transfuse only human blood into another human as a treatment for blood loss. Revolutionary. So his first transfusion patient in 1818 actually died the next day. But apparently it wasn't the transfusion. The patient was already well over the hill. But over the next decade, he experimented on, he did blood transfusions on 10 patients. And 5 of them lived, including a woman who was transfused 4 ounces of blood from her husband in a syringe. And he also made the modern-day equivalent of $50 million because he invented almost all of the equipment that was needed for blood transfusions. He retired in 1840. A lot of his equipment and at least its designs are still in use today. Yay. We all love Ada Lovelace. And there's a reason that she's up here, aside from the fact that it was really, really hard to find a woman to put into this talk. They're just, unfortunately, blood transfusions are highly male and white, at least 5 centuries ago. Anyway, transfusions were still very risky, despite all of Bloodnell's innovation, and transfusion patients often did not survive. They were sort of shunted off into medical obscurity. They lacked attention for most medical researchers. And it really didn't help matters that bloodletting was still incredibly popular. you heard about leeches on the anus earlier tonight. Like, this is just as dumb. This is so dumb. So much. So Ada Lovelace almost certainly died because of the bloodletting that was done to her. Thousands of others died as well, probably tens, maybe hundreds of thousands. It was a bad scene. So blood transfusions in the 19th century were still pretty rare because it's just not safe. There were some isolated successes as the world approached the year 1900. Medical science, getting the snot kicked out of it. And then we tick over to 1901, and Austrian Carl Landsteiner discovers that we have types of blood. 400 years after blood cells are first identified during the scientific Enlightenment, Landsteiner figures out that blood can be categorized into three main groups, A, B, and O. He determined basic principles of blood type compatibility and testing, which are still used today, even 120 years later. Landsteiner would win a Nobel Prize for his work, and in 1907, blood transfusions get significantly safer because Ludwig Hechtoen, an American pathologist, suggests that cross-matching blood between donors and patients to exclude incompatible blood types is a smart thing to do. He joins up with another American physician, a hematologist named Reuben Ottenberg. They put that into practice, and it didn't hurt that World War I was right around the corner. A lot of blood transfusions needed. And we also got the fridge. I love the fridge. The fridge puts ice in my drink. It also made blood storage even safer. And at this point, the number of medical innovations that improve blood transfusion safety skyrockets as doctors and researchers invent anticoagulants, blood banks, plastic bags. The list just goes on. And each one of those things is worthy of a talk or four here. I mean, fascinating stuff. One of the coolest things that was invented was a failure as far as it related to blood transfusions. The French surgeon Alexis Carrel figured out how to prevent clotting by sewing the artery of the donor directly to the vein of the recipient. I told you I'm avoiding the gore. So that's also known as anastomoses, and it proves to be really not good at all for blood transfusions. Just don't do that. But it leads directly to organ transplants. And so the Nobel Prize Committee tells Carrel to take his award in 1912. Thank you, I needed that. By 2020, blood donations, as I said, have plummeted around the world. Fears of HIV-infected blood after nearly a century of increasing blood donations it became, the fear of HIV-infected blood became a real problem, and famous people were infected. People we know were probably infected. Isaac Asimov is one of them. But it was also a very small problem. And blood donations start to go down around the world, despite the need for a growing pool of blood donors. Some countries still have, to this day, de facto or outright bans on blood donation from gay men or people who've had sex with gay men. Many countries, even the US, have begun shifting to a screening test that seeks to only block donors who engage in recent high-risk sexual activity. It doesn't sound like much. It's a remarkable change. It is unfathomable that this change would have happened 30 years ago or even 20 years ago. But the need and the realistic state of the science, is this working? Yay, the GIF is working. So, it's really changed things. So I'd like us to raise our glasses to honor the scientists, the doctors, the researchers, the patients, the donors, and the doggos who've donated their lives, their livelihoods, and their blood to helping us all live to see another day.